tells me recordings in progress. Shalom Aleichem, my tired friends. Today, as we learn Perek Yud Ches, and of course, we are trying to increase the quality and quantity of learning the world with the loss of Sarah Torah, Rav Kanievsky, and we passed around, and actually it was Marvin who sent it to me, the incredible schedule this man kept, what he learned in a day. If you haven't seen it, just do me a favor, raise your hands and I will send it to you on this chat group. You haven't seen it, Marty? Okay, I'll send it. I'll put it on the chat group. You haven't either, Ted. It's crazy. Let's see, Dove, you've seen it, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, and Richard, you've seen it also?
Yeah.
Okay, it's going on the chat group, and Richard, don't ask me how to get on the chat group because I'm not telling you again. Okay, so Perek Yud Ches.
Did anybody see the video of him saying brachas to his wife and his wife saying brachas back to him?
No.
What kind of brachas? No, I did not.
I don't have a copy of it, but I saw it.
I what kind of brachas were we talking about? Okay, Marvin is here.
A
Excellent.
bracha and ein cup.
A bracha and then mazel tov, mazel tov.
Yeah, no. I mean, what you say when you say out loud before you start davening.
In other words, he was davening at home. Amazing. Okay, so Marvin, let's see, does Marvin have his audio connected yet? You connected, Marvin?
It's like Hollywood Squares.
I know. You connected, Marvin? Not yet. He doesn't. Now I see Marvin. Now you're connected. Baruch Hashem. Okay. We're recording Perek Yud Ches. I'm calling Perek Yud Ches. Firstly, I'm telling everybody, since some of you just joined, that last Thursday was Saint Theodore Budman's birthday on St. Patrick's Day. Now forever to be renamed Saint Theodore.
We know this by heart. We know this
Good.
by heart.
And the next part is today, Bo Bayom, Zalman Cohen's birthday. David will always be older than me by a couple of weeks, but that's just the way it goes.
Happy
We
birthday.
both continue with the same delay in our birthdays for
Amen.
at least day of yes from Shana.
Amen.
This Perek Yud Ches, is refuting the mashal of Perek Chaf Beis, of Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Chaf Beis, and dealing with a seeming contradiction, Poked Avon Avos Al Shilei Shem V'Al Ribeim, or otherwise known as things that Moshe said, which were changed. It didn't happen. And we're going to bring in echoes of a shiur that we related to you on October 6th, which was the second in the series of three brilliant lectures by Rabbi Dr. Chaim Angel, who was scholar in residence at KJ, and just a brilliant historian and redactor of Nevi'im and everything else he touches. He's a wonderful lecturer. That will come in. But first, if we just take a look, and I'm only doing this, whoever has cracked this, and I'm sure David Cohen has, because I know David very well, the Daf Mikra tells us how many parts there are to this Perek. And Daf Kuf Tesayid, he says, there are 7 parts. The first one, HaNefesh HaChotas Hi Tamus. The soul that sins, the person that sins, he shall die. Meaning, only he shall die. 2, a tzaddik, meaning, how do we define what a tzaddik is? And the first one is the first 4 psukim. Tzaddik is psukim Hey through Tes Zayin. Hey through Tes, I take that back. Rasha ben tzaddik. What if you have a guy whose father was a tzaddik, but he wasn't? That's part 3. Part 4. Tzaddik ben Rasha, and that would be Psukim Yud Dalet Chaf, and the 5th, Rasha HaChozer B'tshuva B'tzaddik Shenaseh Rasha, Chaf Aleph through Chaf Dalet. There are 2 other parts, but these are the 5 that we will concentrate on tonight. The other 2 are Hadarki Lo Yitachen. Come join us, Naomi. The will Hashem's ways, they're not correct. This is what the people proclaim. We'll deal with that next week. And the 7 is halekach, and this is just this is an echo of everything that we say repeatedly. Yomen no roem says, halekach ki lo echpos b'mos hames v'hishivu b'chayu. Let them come back in tshuva, and they shall live. But we're dealing with the first 5. So if we look at what we're dealing with, the first thing it pays to do is read Psukim Aleph, which is, firstly, it's not Ben Adam yet. It's Vayhi Devar Hashem. Come over, sweetheart. Just move. That's not a regular Navi. Let me give you one. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Just getting a regular Navi. Yecheskel. Here you go. Perik Yirches. And I'll also give you the English. You can take out of there because I won't be referring to, but you guys might want to. You'll see why. First verse is Vayhi Dvar Hashem Elai Lemor. God spoke to me, says Yecheskel. And Hashem says, not to him, but to the people. Ma lachem. What is it with you? Atem moshlim. You who deliver parables. Moshlim es hamashal. You spin the yarn. You tell the parable. You give the fancy phrase. What is the phrase? Hazeh. Al admas Yisrael, on the soil of Israel, Lemor, you say this, Avos yochlu boser, meaning an older generation will eat unripe grapes, that's what boser means, b'shine habanim tikena, but the teeth of the children will get a sharp taste. They will be set on edge. Hakei shinav, as we will soon be reading in Haggadah, which seems to imply they're saying, why is it that one generation sins, and why is it that Hashem punishes a later generation? That is the question that we're asking. But in order to really understand that question, we really have to read. First, let's just talk about that one pasuk Beis. What's said about it? He says, "V'shinei habanim tikena," says Rabbi Eliezer Mibal Ranseh, who's on page 262 in the Mikros Gedolos. He says, "Bitmiya." It's question. Efshar avosenu chatu v'einam yanachnu nisbol avonosam. Our forefathers were no longer in this world, and we have to suffer that punishment. And one line lower, he says, "Shehanaviim misnabim aleinu." The Naviim are prophesizing on us, lilkos, to receive punishment, al ha'ke'asim shechisuhu minashav harishonim, on that which angered God, done by the wicked king Menashe, who's a misunderstood king unless you learn the Gemara about him. He says, v'harishonim, and the earlier generations of where? He says, of Yisrael, the wicked kings, and the thing they said, why are we getting punished for them? Mari Cross says, on that same pasuk on the same page, 262 Mikros Gedolos, Avos yochlu boser v'shinei habanim tikhena, kachayu Yisrael, shebe also hadar misnachamin. They use this to self-comfort, misnachamin, hispalel. They comforted themselves. Masha anuchotin achshav. The fact that we will do sins now, yilkeh hadar acharon. Our kids will get punished, not us. This is how they comforted themselves. The shalom says, the emes yehiyeh biyamenu, will be just fine. Says, shedinhu shehabein nisas avon ha'av, poked avon avos, al shileshim the al ribeyim. Har Sinai. Moshe, God told it to Moshe. He says, v'hadavar hazel loich paslanu. So why do we care? It says, ki mi yivi'enu l'ros b'neh sheyihiyeh acharenu. We're not going to be alive then. We simply don't care. I think it was very interesting to give that perspective first. Now, let's take a look and see some background and some structure to the parak. First things first, I'll read in Ezekiel by Tova Ganzel. And she says about this chapter, the concept of divine justice is treated in 4 separate places. And of those 4 places, we are learning the third. It is Perek Gimel, Perek Yud Dalet, now Perek Yud Ches, and later on Perek Lamed Gimel. What we're dealing with here, unlike other sections in Yecheskel, this chapter is unique, and this is the first 20 psukim. It says, by virtue of the nature of the sins that it enumerates. Elsewhere in the Sefer, social and moral injustices seem to be pushed aside, perhaps owing to the paucity of prophecies addressing them. In common English means we don't have a lot of nevuos who talk about social injustice, but not so in this chapter. This is exactly what we're talking about. So our chapter opens with the people questioning the situation. Parents eat sour grapes and their children's teeth are blunted. You want to be more contemporary, and the kids get the cavities. So what follows is a response of the Navi. And this happens in Pasuk Daled. Read Pasuk Daled, and this should be, firstly, it should be a comfort. Hain, kol hanefashos li.
What about Gimel?
No, I can count, Richard. Trust me on this one. Kol hanefashos li hena. You all belong to me. Kenefesh ha'avu, kenefesh habein. Children, parents, li hena. And he says, and this is what I'm driving at, hanefesh hachotes hi tamus. Does it sound like a direct refutation of Pokei Avon Avos Al Shilei Shem Yaribeim? The answer really and truly does. Then we come across with a list, says of what a tzaddik does. He avoids avodah zara, he avoids gilui arayos. Now, in this sense here, the list resembles the list of the deeds of his wicked son, which follows. We deal with a righteous man who has a bad son, and the bad son who has a good son, which means the grandson is good, and the son in between the grandpa and the grandson is bad. That's what it actually means, as well as the deeds of the righteous grandson, following a description of the deeds attributed to each of the 3 generations. Yecheskel emphasizes that the wicked son will be punished for his actions. That's in Pasuk Yud Ches. And so we just said that, you're not good, that he sins as he gets punished. If you look at Pasuk Yud Ches, it says, Aviv ki oshak oshek. He did an iniquity. Gazal gesel och. We'll explain what that means. He stole. V'asher lo tov asa. Didn't do good. B'toch amav. Among his people, v'hinei meis v'avono. He will die due to his sin. That's Pasuk Yud Ches. Concludes with the same idea with which he began. The person who sins, he alone shall die. That's Pasuk Chaf. Okay, that's his take on it. But there is more to be said, a lot more to be said. First thing I want to bring into it, and this will take us back to what I said, Perek Yud Bet. Rav Eisman, in his introduction to the Perek, says, in Pasuk Perek Yud Bet, Chaf Aleph through Chaf Hey, we noted the prophet's battle against Mishalim. Well, if you notice, Pasuk Beis is Malachem Atem Moshlim Es Hamashal, and he quotes what the mashal is. He says, "What's a mashal?" David will tell me what a mashal is. He's very deep into this what this phrase means. You got to turn on your mic, Dave.
Yeah, in this case, he's using it as catchy phrases, which we had in the past. Just like a political phrase and so on, and it's easy for people to remember. It has a rhyme or a meter, or something catchy about it. And The problem with catchy phrases is that it's so catchy that people kind of just start to believe it, even if they didn't at first. It becomes part of them. And that's why he's really against these things. We had that in the past as well. And a few chapters ago, Ezekiel substituted different words very similar to try to change it into an optimistic way. So here he's against these catchy phrases. That's it.
Okay, and actually, you're right. I think you called it sloganism before.
Slogans.
Right.
Slogans.
Yeah, you have a slogan and people rally around the slogan. And he says, literally, he says that these short, pithy sayings which encapsulated the people's attitudes and served as slogans around which to rally opposition to God's message. You know, what is it? Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. You know, lahavdil favdolos. You know, we're not going to get schmeiced because God doesn't schmeiss. Eretz Yisrael belongs to us forever. That was a real one. So he continues to say the all-pervasive reality, which permeates. Oh, excuse me. One second. We click a safer. I'm sorry. I should have had it over here. I apologize. Here it is. I'm very sorry. Okay. He says that every facet of existence during Yerushalayim's final few years was what was going to be happening, the Churban. Faced with the certainty of destruction, people were forced to consider its implications for God's justice and providence. They had to face the fact that they were, for lack of a better term, going down. They knew themselves to be sinners. They also knew that sins were not greater than those of earlier generations. At best, they saw themselves beset by a cumulative guilt for which they were only partially responsible. In other words, why are we getting the punishment from the time of Menashe, from the 300 years of the time of Israel and all their sins? Why are we getting it? At best, they saw themselves beset by a cumulative guilt if they were only partially responsible. In their minds.
Yeah, I think there's another part to it as well. And that is the Navi in this chapter, he's trying to comfort the people as well. He's trying to say to them, listen, you are not doomed because of your parents' sins.
Hold the thought. We'll get to it. It's in here.
Okay.
We'll get to it. We have to get to the point, which we will. But thank you. In their minds, the justice God was called into question as was God being just? As they grappled with these problems, and this questioning would have a profound effect on their actions and attitudes. They formulated their probings, into the mashal, the proverb in which this chapter deals. But then again, we said the proverb did not originate here. The proverb originated in Perek Yud Bet, Pasuk Chaf Bet. And the Pasuk says, Ben Adam, ma hamashol hazeh lachem. Well, that looks a little familiar over there. Ma lachem atem hamoshlim es hamashol, is our lashon. He says, what is the proverb, this proverb of yours in the land? Al admas Yisrael lemor. What did they say? Ya'archu hayamim v'avad kol chazon. You know what that means? That means the days will draw out and every vision, meaning every nevuah, will disappear. Nevuah. In other words, the prophecies of doom and gloom, wait a second, they haven't happened yet. The longer we wait, they're not happening. And besides, if they're not a reality for me right now, what do I care about later? As the Maharikra said. So that is what he said. Now, at this point, I'm going to call your attention back to the lecture that we talked about on October the 6th, which is the lecture that was told by Reb Chaim Angel. And he said, the majority of Perek Yud Ches is about proverbs and proverb making. Said, our questions are the grapes, our ancestors ate the grapes, and our teeth are the ones that get cavities or are blunted. He says, we are suffering for what they did. Hashem responds, that proverb shall no longer exist. He also sins, he who sins is he who shall die. We read that out of context. He who sins is he who shall die. The rest of the chapter reinforces what Hashem never punishes intergenerationally. Very important word, because that is what's alluded to by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe is pokeid avon avos al shilei shim al ribeim, meaning the sin that I do in 2022 is going to come out a generation later in 2042, and come out a generation after that in 2062. That's intergenerational punishment. And he's saying that Hashem will not be punishing intergenerationally. And he says, very unambiguously, when we'll read the Psukim, it says, we sin, we get punished. We don't sin, we don't get punished. On the contrary, we get rewarded. But the Aseret Divros contradicts it. He says, Korach's family rebelled, he says, and the families are punished. Contradictions. We say in Shemona Esrei, Zocher Chastei Avos. That's intergenerational merit. So is there intergenerational merit, not intergenerational punishment? So Yechezkel is a prophet, and this is coming from Hashem, and this is a contradiction. Stira Hashem al Hashem. God is contradicting himself. The commentators scramble like crazy on this point. How do we reconcile? One, the Aseret Divros. Later generations are only punished if and when they are sinful. Yechezkel says, if later generations are righteous, they're not punished. So the dominant position, that's the position of Rashi, Rambam, Rashbam, Ibn Ezra. They all come up with this. Now there's a second tract. It's Yosef Bar Hanania. He says, Moshe made 4 statements that the Nevi'im revoked. And this is one of them. Bokein avon avos. Yechezkel says, Achotei yamos. And it matches very well with all the previous contradictions revoked. But hold on. Can Nevi'im negotiate the Torah? Moshe's Torah said that later generations will be punished. Can we negotiate this? And this is the opinion of Rav Eliezer Meibal Gonse. He says Yechezkel is writing in a different age. Remember, what we talked about, the Mashal, talked about in Eretz Yisrael. He says, where is Yechezkel talking? He's talking in Golos, talking in Bavel. And other books of the Torah were written to corporate Yisrael living in Eretz Yisrael, who are judged as a collective. Now, we are in exile, being judged as individuals, not as Klal Yisrael. What does that mean? That means the huge mountain of sin will no longer fall on the shoulders of every individual, because Yechezkel is saying, as Rabbi Eliezer is saying, it's a totally different reality. Now, Rav Kook says, no. He says Yechezkel actually changes theology. Yechezkel thought, we are in exile. He says, you have hundreds of years of sin on our shoulders. How do I fix this? He says, I know, I'll just change the rules. He said, and God will hear me, and he'll do it. And Hashem says, okay, this is not me. This is Rav Kook. He says, Yechezkel said, I'm changing the rules because we're living in a, much like the others, in a different reality. We're in Gullus now, he says. And a tzaddik can change things, says Rav Kook. This is a 20th century approach. And never read the Torah and nach for consistency. Prophets are dealing with a real people at a fixed point in time. Yirmiyah quotes the same proverb. He says this very same thing, but he is talking about the future. Yechezkel is talking about right here and now, but they are talking at the same time. Yechezkel is talking about what will happen in the future. Excuse me, Yirmiyah will happen in the future in Bavel. Yirmiyah is in Yerushalayim, which is going to go down in flames. And Yechezkel is talking about the reality for the people who are not in Yerushalayim. So Yirmiyah has to justify the Churban to the people. And they are telling their generations, 3 to 4 generations back, in the time of Menashe, he was the worst, and they didn't get punishment. Menashe was a sinner, and he doesn't get punished. So this is all based on intergenerational punishment, according to Yirmiyah. Yechezkel says the Churban has already happened. Now he says, I have to rebuild the future. The only way it can be done is to ignore the hundreds of years of sins and focus on personal responsibility now. David was saying, you got to give them something. You got to give them a future. You got to give them a hope. Otherwise, where are they? What's there to look forward to? We're only looking forward to the fact that we're going to get punished for things we didn't do. There is no Klal Yisrael. There's no hope. And he says,
he's trying to encourage them to do tshuva, basically. That's the classic old Nevi'im. They would come, they'd say, things are bad, do tshuva, God will save you. And they're saying, well, even if we do tshuva, we're getting punished for our parents' sins. And he says, you will not get punished for your parents' sins. Even if you've done sinning now, you could still do tshuva and you'll be okay.
Or, yes, that's a part of this, and we will approach it in the Psukim. But also, he's saying that if you do good, it's good. If you've sinned and then you do good, wipe it away. He said, if you do bad, you get punished. So what David says is tshuva, absolutely, because you've left the life of a sinner and commenced the life of a righteous person. That's so much for that lesson. Now, let's go on. Let's go take a look at what the Psukim themselves are telling us. If we look at the Psukim, Pasuk Gimel, and we'll read the Radak on this. It says, Chai ani ne'um Hashem Elokim. This is an oath. Im yihiyeh lachem od mishol hamashol hazeh b'Yisrael. If you're going to give me the same slogan, what was the slogan based on? The slogan was based upon the fact that they were saying, as we learned much earlier, that if we are in Eretz Yisrael, God can never touch us because it's nitzchias, eternal. The land will always belong to us. God will never throw us out of this land. Not so much. No, it's not right. But listen to what the Radak says. Chayani, he says, Im yelachem od mashal hamashal hazeh. If you're going to say this again, he says, that's the Radak on page 263. Ani odiabam, I will show them mishpatai udrachai. I'll show them what my laws are and how to act. Below tit u od bo, and you will no longer be able to say what you have been saying. Besitnu datchem v'sir'u kikenhu. He says, watch what I'm saying, read my lips. This is the way you have to act. He says, ki kol hanefashos li hena, which is pasuk daled. Richard wanted to know why I was reading there. V'anina sati osam babasar lahanhig haguf v'leches acharai. And I coded it into the DNA that they'll follow me. Says, and I underlined this in red. Ba'ani rotzeh b'chayehin below b'misa son. I want him to live. I don't want him to die. Ki lo hena umikfodi tigzeru kenefesh av kenefesh habein. He says, they all belong to me. They're the same to me. The Father, the Son. I treat them the same with consistency. How could you think? She'enish hanefesh. Thou punish the soul. And lo chatali, chalilali, he says. If that person didn't sin, I'm going to punish him? Says the Radak, speaking for Hashem. We read Pasuk Daled, and we're going to continue. Pasuk Hey, the next few psukim, there are a number of Mefarshim who really explain it very, very well. The Malbim, Chomas Hanoch, Mitzudas Tzion, with translations, gives really, really nice Perushim. So look at what's going on over here. By the way, if you're turning the pages in the Mikros Gedolos, you see you get to page Pasuk Hey, you see pages and pages of commentary in Mincha Gedolah. It'd be wonderful to read, but we're not going to read it. And he bases the Abarbanel and goes off in his tangent, which is great. Don't get me wrong, I'm not him. The Ish, Kihiyet Sadik. Okay, V'yasah Mishpat Utstaka. What does that mean? So let's, in order to see the picture of what that means, we got to read Vav and Zayin too. El Harim Lo Achal. I don't know what that means yet. Ve'inav Lo Nasa El Gilulei Beis Yisrael. To the idols of Beis Yisrael. That we understand. It's Eishes Reyehu Lo Tima. He didn't sin. He didn't commit adultery. Yel Ishani Da Lo Yikrav. He didn't overstep the prohibitions of Nida with his own wife or with someone else's wife. And Zion, the Ish Lo Yoneh Chavo Lo So. What does Yoneh mean? Yoneh means, if we look into Mitzudas Tzion, he says, Ona'ah. Says the Inyano, he says, Kachas Hahon. That's like taking, what's a good word for, what's the translation saying, Yomi? That's in Pasuk Zion. Ish lo yoneh chavo lo so chov yoshiv gzeila chov yoshiv gzeila. In other words, you won't take what's not yours.
Returns a collateral for a debt.
Get talk louder, please. He says he returns collateral for a get.
He does not oppress any man. That's what they.
He acts fair and square. He doesn't steal. Lachmo lora yitain. He will give bread to he who is hungry, and yitain, he says, a Rome yechaseh beged. Let's look back on these psukim for a second. He says, the Malbim says on Pasuk Hey that Ish ki et tzaddik, he says, b'tiv'o, tzaddik hu kinyan b'nafsho. Being a tzaddik is acquiring guard in your soul. It says, Asher, the gam also, v'yasah mishpat tzedakah b'po'el. In other words, I can acquire God in my soul. I'm religious deep in my heart, but I don't act. No. He says, asa is an action word. Asa mishpat tzedakah. He says, mishpat b'mitzvah shebein adam l'chaveiro. Tzedakah ben adam l'makom. Now, the Chomat Tanakh has a beautiful parish. I'm Sukkim Hey through Zion's on page 264. You want to follow along. Ish ki yet tzaddik v'yasah mishpat tzedakah. Efshar, the Ramaz, ki kol me'ayanav shel tzaddik b'kiyum haTorah. A tzaddik is interested in keeping God's law, ha-mitzvos, hu yuchad kucha brichu shchinte. That is to form the unification of God and Shechina. The Zer Remez asa mishpat. What's mishpat? He says Tiferes. Tiferes is one of the 7 sfirot, the 7 spheres that rise above the earth. Utstaka, Malchus. That's a higher one. Kikol nigamaso liached kucha brichu ushchinte. What we do on Siras HaOmer every day is we try to unify the midos of the Rebbeinu Shalom with the spheros, with these levels, to get to the level of Malchus Sheba Malchus. So he says, we're trying to unify all these conditions, but he says, El Harim Lo, he says, Achal, V'nitzol Me'avodah Zarah. He says, that means he didn't go to Bamos and didn't eat the karbanos that he brought in the Bamos, which is supposed to be olos in the Beis Hamikdash. Yes, Ashes Rei Ehu, Nitzol, says, Mi Gilui Arayos. The Ishlo Yoneh, he says, at the first one, Avizra, I don't know what that word means, the Shfichas Domim, Shahagozel, Gilu Gozel Nafsho. That a person who steals is like a person, he says, Ishlo Yoneh, that means when you steal, you're like committing Shfichas Domim, you're stealing a person's soul, you're stealing a part of him. The Zehushin is Harme Averos, Gam Mekayem Mitzvos. He says, okay, that's what you stay away from. Lachmo l'ra'ev yitain. He says, he mitzvahs tzedakah, hashkula kechol ha-mitzvos. When you feed a hungry person, you give him tzedakah. Giving tzedakah, he says, that's equivalent to all the rest of the mitzvos in the Torah. It says, v'nizhar la'asosa ketikna. Do it the way God intended it to be done, the way it was established. Zeu shamar lachmo l'ra'ev, daika masha ochelhu. That means lachmo. I may be ready for lunch, but this man is starving. I'll give him what I was going to eat. I think it's a particularly beautiful parish. And continuing forward, Pasuk Vav, he says, Yoneh, he says, Ona'ah, injustice, Klomar, Shum Ish Lo Hona. You didn't do anything like that to any man. Chavoloso, this is Rashi, Chov Yoshiv. He says, Im Chaval Salmas Reyehu. You borrowed a sheep. He says, Bechovo Yoshivo so, Lo Givo Hashemis. You'll give it back, he says, by night. And on that, and the Perush Harid says, El Harim Lo of Chal says, Uzivchei Mesim, Shahayu Osim Magilu Lehem, Shayu Al Harim Haramim. This is talking about what they did with Avodah Zarah. I'm not quite sure what he means by Zivchei Mesim, but they all seem to say the same comment. Zivchei Mesim, that they did to their Avodah Zarah, well, of course, they were from Jews. He says, Shahu al Harim Haramim, on the high places, which are really the bummers. Now, the Malbim says, El Harim, he says, that's Taka Ben Adam Lamakom, Shalo Achal Takrovas Avodah Zarah. That he explains it as saying, you did not eat from karbanos that were brought to Avodah Zarah. Presumably, you didn't do Avodah Zarah. He says, the Ish Lo Yana, says the Malbim, Faresh Mishpat Bein Adam L'Chavero. So they're fairly consistent on these things. Now, on Pasuk Ches, B'neshech lo yitain, B'tarbis lo yikach. Mitzudas Tzion really need to explain what's Neshech and what's Tarbis. Anybody want to venture a guess what neshech is and what tarbis is?
It's taking an excessive percentage. Neshech, it's a bite out of a person because you're taking so much from them, you know.
And it's also like, it's like a snake, that a snake bites you in the heel when not expecting it. It hits you at an unexpected moment. Commotion Emar says Mitzidos, es kastacha lo titain lo beneshech b'marbis lo titain ochlecha. Okay.
Usually.
The percentage when you loan.
And Naomi says, yes, loud.
Let's read this.
Maybe it's interest.
Right, it's taking interest when you loan.
It's taking interest when you loan. That's marbis.
Mhm.
Now, Pasuk Test says, B'chukosai, now remember, we're describing a righteous man. B'chukosai yahalech, mishpatai shamar, asos emes, tzaddik hu. Oh, I just say one more thing. I'm sorry, I forgot to say, but it's so beautiful that I have to go back and say it. Where it says before, on Pasuk Zayin, Beirom Yechaseh Beged. Listen to what he says. Chomas Anach says, Beged. Lo speak lomar Beirom Yechaseh. He doesn't say you'll cover up a naked person. After he's naked, you throw a rag over him. It's better because he was naked. He says, no. He says, the Hagam Shehu Arom Mahoya Mastiklo Eza Davar Lachasos Besaroki Arampu. He would have been good enough to cover him with anything. Aval Hu Yichaseh Beged Chashuv Shoya Ose says Bishalem Shebifanim. He says he's internalized this mitzvah to the point where he sees a naked person. He doesn't throw him a quarter. He doesn't throw a newspaper over him. Like he takes off his own jacket. Takes off his own jacket to cover him up because he's a person just like me. That's a particular madrega. So, Tats b'chukosai yahalech mishpatai shamar lasos emes tzadiku. If a person does what Hashem wants him to do. So Radak says on this thing, b'chukosai yahalech hagam she'ein lahem tam. Oh, chukim. In other words, I don't know the reason. Well, I have a poor man and he's naked and I need to, or he's hungry, I got to feed him, I got to clothe him. No, he says, the things we don't understand the reasons for, you do chukim too. Yahalech me'atzmo. It's internal. That's the key. Your life is centered around bringing nachas to the Ribono Shalom. Umishpatai shamar dehaya mamtin. He would hold off, Amosai, Tavo ha-mitzvah yadol kaima. He'd wait, when can I do this mitzvah? Lahavdil, when can I do shiluach hakein? In other words, he's not going to say, pay some guy $5,000 to do the mitzvah shiluach hakein. He says, it comes to him, he'll wait to do it in the proper manner and the proper time. Ki bazen nimsa shekiyen kol ha-mitzvos. When you do them properly at the right time, when they come to you. Zel Shamar Lasos Emes Klomar, Lekayim HaTorah, because HaTorah nikres Emes. The Torah is called Emes. So this is what a righteous man does. Now, the Malbim says, V'chukosai Halech, that's Ben Adam L'makom. Mishpatai Shamar, Adam L'chavero. He says, he came in tzaddiku before El. He emphasizes, if you're a tzaddik, that means you're doing something. It's not all internal. You're doing actions. Nosaf halakinyan benafsho, as we said before. I accept God in my heart. I accept God in my soul. How about my actions? And pasuk yud, v'holid. Listen to this. This is a tzaddik we just described. We just went through all these pasukim and talk about what a tzaddik is. But listen, v'holid ben poritz. What is ben poritz? Look at B'tzida Sion on page 271. Ritzon Omar, Russia. This tzaddik has a son who's a Russia. haporetz geder ha'emes v'hagavocha. V'hagichocha. I'm not sure what that means. Nechocha, still don't know what it means. He says, the good man has a different. Say it again, David.
Like reach nichoach, I don't know.
Hanechocha,
Pleasing?
reach nichoach.
I don't have that.
Makes sense. It's in Mitzuda Sion. I have it. Okay. But bottom line is, Paritz is a Russia. The tzaddik has a Russia. Shofech dam. V'asa ach me'achad me'ela. This is a fascinating pasuk. Now, Naomi says nechocha means straight.
To walk the straight line.
To walk the straight line, she says. Thank you. Pasuk Yud. Look at the Malbim says, Holid. Im hatzadik hazeh holid ben Paritz. He had a bad seed. V'oseh ach. Listen what this means. Amazing. Ritzono lomar. Hagam yesh lo ach she'asa me'achas me'ela. What's he saying? He said, this father has two sons. One is just like him, and one is the opposite of him. And we're saying, we're taking a look at this son who does not do the right stuff, and he has two role models to follow, his brother and his father. And if this person doesn't follow either role model, he says, he says he has a son who does the good stuff. Who is called Ela Loasa.
You're saying ach means a brother?
Yes, it's not me. That's the Malbim says it.
Holid ben Paritz shoched dam basa ach.
Yeah. He says the words asa ach me achad me Ela. Holid ben Paritz v'shofech dam b'asa ach me achad me Ela. The Malbim translated as meaning that Hagam sheyesh lo ach she'asa me'achas ve'ela hamasim tovim.
Maybe my brain's not working, but I understood you to say that the Chacham had a son who was a Russia.
The Chacham had a son who was a Russia, and the son who was a Russia had a brother who was acting like his father acts. The lo lamad.
The Hebrew's awful. That's
How about
awful
if I give you
Hebrew.
this one?
Say, David?
The Hebrew's awful. It's awful. Asa ach, who makes a brother? Well, who are we talking about? It doesn't make any sense. That translation.
Okay. I would suggest the next version you will edit, and it'll make better Hebrew.
You're not going to like this.
What am I not going to like, Marvin? Let me hear.
The Chacham had a son who was a Russia. Why does the Chacham have a son who was a Russia? Because he called himself a Chacham. Are you really a Chacham? You know everything. You know Kulo. It's your attitude. The attitude that you are a Chacham. And what did you produce? You produced a Russia. And the Tam. What did the Tam produce? Shena Yadei L'Sho.
He's saying it all degrades down one generation after the other.
Right. And I'm going to use this on my Seder table.
Beautiful.
What you just said, it just like banged in my head. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing. I never thought of it about before.
Interesting.
The relationship between the Chacham and the Russia, and the relationship between the Tam and Shena Yadei L'Sho.
So what David really does not like, what Naomi agrees with, are the words of the Malbim HaKadosh, who says, this boy who's a bad seed had role models to look at that he did not follow. Says, you are welcome to find any other Mefarshim who say other things, and I'd love to hear it.
So repeat that, what does the Malbim say?
The
Yeah,
Malbim
role
says-
models that what?
There's a whole thing about it.
Okay, who says what, Naomi?
The mother has a whole thing about it.
Yeah, honey, I have it in front of me.
Repeat that. He had role models that.
Holid, Imat Tzaddik Hazeh, Holid ben Paritz. He had a son who was bad. The Asa Ach We're still talking about the tzaddik who had a Russia, and he says, V'osa ach. So David, you may not like it, and he made for him a brother. Add the word lo in, David, maybe it works for
No,
you.
it's not.
Naomi, can I finish what he's saying? I'm just reading it. Ritzono lomar, hagam yesh lo ach she'asa me'achas me'ela hama'asim tovim shel aviv.
Right.
He is a role model as well. He emulated some of his father's behavior. He says, B'cholzos, who, being the paritz, lo lamad, lo me'aviv, lo me'achav. Okay, I didn't write it. I can only explain the way it was interpreted. All right, I happen to like what he said, but others don't, and God bless you, you're all entitled. But go weiter. He says, what did he do? So first we described the masim of the tzaddik. Now we describe the masim of the Russia. They're going to be a reverse mirror image. Pasuk Yud Beis, Ani v'yavon, Hona, Gazelas, Gazel, Chavo, Lo Yashiv. He says he's going to steal from the poor. He says he will take the pikadon, whatever, he will not give it back. He says, yes, Agilimna sign of, and he looks to the idols, Toevasa. He's an abomination. He's doing an abomination. Viter continues. The Neshech Nasan, he lends with compound interest. The Tarbis Lakach, he says, and he takes ribis. V'chai. Is he going to live? Bitmiya? Lo yichyeh. He's going to live. It's called Tevos Ha'elasa. Moshe was the Mav Bo Yiyeh. It's the same lashon we have over and over in Parshas Kedoshim, which is my bar mitzvah. Bo Shamav Damav Bo. It's usually about the Arayos, the Behem Bum. So he says his blood is on him. So what are we doing? We're reinforcing that he who sins is he who gets punished, which is, remember, a Russia, then tzaddik. But Pasuk Yudalid flips it again. Pasuk Yudalid is now talking about the grandson, the son of a Russia, whose grandfather was a tzaddik. Halid Ben, he says, Vayaras kol achatos aviv asher asa vayireh v'lo yasek hein. Can't believe my father's this arsper for my grandfather. He says, it's tzaddik? He says, I'm not doing what my father did. Again, it's the same stuff we had by the tzaddik and the flip side by the Russia. We're now reverting to what a tzaddik does. Eloharim lo achal. He didn't go and eat from the sacrifices, he says, on Bomos, to Avodah Zarah. Ve'inav lo nasal gilulei beis Yisrael. He didn't look at the Avodah Zarahs. There's Eish Yisrael lo tima. He didn't do Gilui Arayos. The Ish lo hana. He did not oppress a person. He didn't steal from Chavol lo Chaval. Gzelo lo Gazal. Lachmo lo Ra'ev Nasan. Eram Kisah Baged. Everything that we said that defines a tzaddik that his Zaidi did, he does. Me ani heshiv yado neshich v'tarbis lo lakach lishbatai asa v'chukosai halach. Now I'm going to ask you guys, going to break in 1 second, in the middle of a pasuk. Why are we being told this? Why are we going to the length of talking about a generation of a tzaddik, with a son, a Russia, with a grandson, a tzaddik? Why are we being told this now?
Listen, it's not Pokad Avon Avon Banim.
Loud, my dear.
It's not Pokad Avon Avon Banim.
You're right.
It's just
Why? Look at the last half of the pasuk. Hulo yamus bavon aviv. He says, Chaya yichyeh. He doesn't get punished. He's going to live a beautiful life. Pasuk Yud Ches. Aviv, but his father. Ki Ashak Oshek, Gazal Gezel, Ach, stole from his brother, Asher Lo Tov Asa, B'toch Hamav. He's an Osworth. Ine Nes Avodo. He will die for what he did. But listen to this. This next pasuk is mind blowing. V'amartam, madua lo nasa habein avon ha'av. But wait a second. Bokeh avon avos al shlishim yarim. Says, wait. He didn't get punished. Habein mishpat utstaka asa. Yes, kol hu gosai shomar v'yaseh osam chayo yichyeh. You're righteous. I don't care who your father was. You're wicked. I don't care who your father was. What you do is what you are judged for and how you are rewarded or punished. And Pasuk Chaf, to complete it, Hanefesh hachotes, he samos. The soul that sins, the person who sins, he will die. Bein lo yisa ba'avon ha'av. I mean, you can't make it any clearer. He says, a son will not carry the weight of his father's sin. The of lo yisa ba'avon ha'bein. And the father won't carry the iniquity of his son. Habein tzidkas hatzadik alav tihiyeh, v'rishas harasha alav tichya. I mean, it's being hammered. It's being hammered with a 9-pound hammer into your brain. There is no poked avon avos. Moshe's rule has been abrogated here and now. Chaf Shalaf. Listen to this. The harasha. Ki yashuv mikol chataso. It's the ksiv is chataso and kri is chatosov. He returns, but it says mikol chatosov. Interesting. Asher rasa. He returns. He repents for all the sins that he did. The shamar is kol chukosai, and he preserves all of those mitzvos that I gave that I didn't explain the reasons for. Ben adam lemakom, between man and God. V'yasam mishpat u'tzedakah, and just righteousness. Chayo yichya v'lo yamus. As David Kohen said way back an hour ago, he said, Tshuva. Tshuva works. Tshuva will work. But kol pishav asher asa lo yizkaru lo. I had a whole discussion today with my chavrusa in the Mishnayos and Yevamos. I told my Rebbe this morning, and Richard was there, he knows. I said, I just got out of Yevamos Perek Yud Gimel. When we get to that Mishnah, there will be guns and rifles out, people trying to understand a word that's going on over here. So he says over here, Lo Yizkaru, because my Chavrus and I were arguing about the difference between avoided marriage, what miyun is, means it erases, a get breaks a marriage. Miyun, he said, is when a minor girl has the right to not annul, but wipe out that the marriage ever existed. And she can do it serially while she's a katana. Stay tuned when you learn it. He says, Kol b'shav asher so lo yizkaru. There's no sign of them. When you take an eraser and you erase it, there's nothing left. B'tzidka so asher so yichyeh. Over and over and over again. Hachafot echpos mos rasha. He says, is this what I want? Do you think? Remember, God said, I'm going to show you my law for everybody. I'm giving a pattern for you. I'm explaining it in every permutation that exists. He says, I don't want the Rasha to die. Let him do tshuva and he'll live. And finally, tzaddik mitzidka. So, but it goes both ways. A tzaddik says, not so much anymore. Avel, he does iniquity. Starts acting like a Rasha again. You think that guy's going to live? Lo tizkarna. I don't care what he did before. Never be remembered. He says because he broke his promise. Bum yamus. And you know what? You're a tzaddik for 100 years. In 101st year, you become a Russia. You die a Russia and you get punished as a Russia. God says, where you are at this point in time is what's important to me. Why? And then I'm going to read the last pasuk, and we're not going to teach it out till next week. The Amartem, you're going to say, Lo yitachen derech Hashem. That's not right. Shemuna Beis Yisrael. God says, Hadarchi lo yitachen? You think I'm not doing the right thing? Well, darchechem lo titachnu. No, you are doing the wrong things. You're only getting upset when I tell you that. Said, it's not right that a guy who's a tzaddik for 100 years and the 101st year is a sinner. That's not right. He says, no. He says, that's right. You're not right. You want to know why? We'll deal with it next week. B'siyata d'shvaya. I want to wish everybody a good night and happy St. Theodore's Day and happy David Kohen Day, and everything should be good for everybody. And Shalom Al Yisrael. Good night, guys.
Right. So, good night.
Good night.